Hello Whisky fans, it seems to be getting colder and certainly getting darker outside, which must mean that it's December, and that must mean that it's time for another dram. December the 4th, let's look for our fourth door, big one down the bottom again. So as we found out last time, they're not extra large samples on the double doors. Just standing up. Hopefully none of these have leaked in here, because potentially won't find out for a while. Oh, come on. Aha. So this is another Scotch single malt, 47.8%. So I was thinking earlier, I'm guessing at some point we are going to get some bourbons and some international world whiskies in here, but this is another Scotch single malt. It is Darkness 8-year-old. So I'm guessing this is another Atom product from basically the Master of Malt. So the Darkness range is single malt procured from whatever distillery they choose, and I believe they usually re-rack it into some sort of wine cask, so Pedro Jimenez or port or first fill sherry or something that usually ends up with a very dark colour to the whiskey. I would expect something like this is probably natural colour. So it's a little bit interesting that they don't actually say what distillery this is from. So I might have to do a little bit of research there to find out if there's any more information available on this one. But you know what? Let's go in blind. There's a clean glass. Let's see what we think. And then I'll see if I can get any more information after we've had that first impression. So, straight out the bottle. It's actually, on first impressions, not a million miles away from the Benriach that I had a couple of days ago. Anyway, let's stop that. Let's get it in the glass, do things properly. So what I will say about this whiskey is that it's not as dark as you would think for a whiskey called Darkness. And like I say, the Master of Malt, they usually, I believe, I haven't had all of them, but I believe that the Darkness range is usually in something like red wine or port or first fill sherry, a really heavy, grape influenced, dark cask finish or maturation of some sort. And I've had some of these Darkness releases. In particular, there was I think it was a 24-year-old Ardbeg that had been finished in some sort of wine cask, and it was absolutely phenomenal. But I've also had some other Darkness whiskies, particularly younger ones, that haven't really floated my boat that much. But this one, if nothing else, it's surprising because it's not got those notes that I immediately expected. It's expecting sort of red wine and really sweet, intense sort of cask finish, flavour dipped, intense red wine, Amarone, those sorts of things. Like basically a really strong fortified wine that's not like that at all. And I think if you tasted this blind, you wouldn't immediately say that it was a cask finish. You'd be more dissecting and analysing and looking at the finer intricacies of this whiskey and the maltiness and things, rather than saying, yes, this is a cask finished, grain influenced whiskey. So I've flown off on a little bit of a tangent there. Let's actually get round to nosing this properly and see what we have got. Yeah, so what I was going to say, surprising, that what I'm getting on the nose of this is it's more of a orange-driven nose. Lots of orangey notes in there. And there's some bitter, pithy orange notes, orange peel, as well as some more candied, the sort of candied orange peel that you get in upmarket sweets or in a Christmas cake, something like that. So like I said, it's not hugely and obviously or obnoxiously sherried as you expect some of these things to be, but it is definitely there. So in my notes that I've been taking here, not hugely sherried. Got some notes of fizzy sort of lemon sherbet, some effervescent notes, as well as a little bit of lemony, sherbety, sort of scented floral soap powdery notes, as well as plenty of nuttiness. So there are definitely the hallmarks of sherry influence in there, but it's not overdone, it's not heavy-handed. And it actually smells a lot, especially seeing this is fairly high ABV, 47.8, it smells much more mature than 8 years old as well. I'm actually getting some notes in there that is like a really good Dundee cake. So syrupy, candied orange peel, nutty, as I've said before, syrupy, got lots of different spices and nuts in there, like cinnamon and a touch of gingeriness in there, and I think that's probably coming through from some very active wood. What else have I put in my notes? Cinnamon, nutmeg, marzipan is definitely something that's coming up in there, marzipan and almonds. And I think what I was thinking of when I first opened this and I smelt it out of the tiny little 30ml bottle, I said that it had something similar to the Benriach 12-year-old cherrywood that I've tasted recently out of the advent calendar. Is that it's got a certain farmy quality to it. There's a definite, I don't know if it's peated, but definitely a little bit of funk in there. Possibly a very slight hint of peat, but definitely a very mild dirtiness to this whiskey. So let's see how it tastes. Well, I didn't expect that. It's actually really upfront on the palate, really intense and rich and sweet. And not in your usual sherry cask finish way. It's not like a whiskey that's been dumped into a soaking wet fresh sherry cask for the last part of its maturation. It's just being drowned out by those sherry flavours. It's a really well integrated experience. So straight away on the palate you get this huge, full, intense flavour, and it's, again, as per the nose, it's very orange driven, almost and sort of notes of a very well made, very mature orange liqueur. There's lots of maltiness on the palate as well. I definitely wouldn't guess that this is an 8-year-old whiskey. And towards the end it's moving over to some slightly dry, peppery, oaky notes, but not the sort of dry astringency that you can get on some whiskies where it's all taken over by tannins and oak spice. It's not like that. It's all, I can't actually pinpoint any part of this whiskey which I would say is a flaw. It's not necessarily the sort of thing that I go crazy for. It's not entirely to my tastes, but it's a really well made whiskey. Again, getting really nice notes on the late palate of sort of like a Dundee cake flavour. So syrupy, sweet. It's a very Christmassy flavour. It's really appropriate for a whiskey advent calendar. I am without a doubt that they've chosen this one for that very reason. So syrupy, lots of lovely spices, sort of mulled wine spices, and a really nice nuttiness on that late palate as well. As for the finish, it's a little bit difficult to quantify because it is a long finish, but it's also fairly simple. And the main feature of that finish really is, as I've mentioned before, that slightly dry, slightly bitter, candied orange peel flavour that really, it's almost worrying that it really clings to your taste buds, and I can still taste it now, but it has to be said that most of the flavours that I was describing on the palate, they do die off fairly quickly, and you're just left with this singular last man standing orange peel note that just stays with you for a really long time. So a surprising whiskey in 3 ways really. Surprising that it's not just a flavour dipped cask finish, which I was kind of thinking it probably would be. The nose is surprisingly complex and really quite nice, and the palate is really surprisingly intense and rich. So lots of good surprises. I'm just going to have a quick look do a little bit of research on my phone, see if I can find any more information on this one. So I found a little bit of information here. It is a sherry finished whisky. So it's been matured in ex-bourbon barrels, and so it's an 8-year-old whisky, and for the last 3 months it's re-racked into Oloroso sherry octave casks. So that's quite interesting. So it is a cask finish, which I wasn't sure. I was sort of leaning towards it not being. I think that for a cask finished whisky, this is a really good cask finish. And I'm now wondering if that slight note that I got, the spiciness, the wood spice and the ginger that I got on the nose, I'm wondering if a lot of that spiciness isn't from those octave casks, because an octave cask is a really small cask. I think it's actually a little bit less than half of the size of a quarter cask. So 3 months in one of those tiny eighth casks, you could call them, it's going to have quite a huge impact. And especially if that's reasonably fresh wood, you are going to get those spices, the sort of thing that I was picking up on the nose. Contrary to what I usually say about small casks and quarter casks and things that really put a huge amount of spice into a whisky, I quite like this one. I think it's worked really well. And I can see this being a smart choice by Master of Malt to go into their advent calendar, because being a Master of Malt product, I also found when I was doing my research it sells for around £50 a bottle, and £50 a bottle for a sherry cask finished 8-year-old whisky, I would probably not touch that with a 10-foot pole, because that's really quite expensive for a whisky of that description, in my opinion. But now that I've tried this, I might actually be persuaded to change my mind, because it's a lot better than it sounds, and I would actually be tempted to buy a whole bottle of this at some point. Really is very Christmassy. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you thought of Darkness 8-year-old. Cheers.